Someone want to open us in prayer? Any volunteers? Yes, sir.
Father, we thank you that we can gather together, listen to your word you taught, and pray for your blessings upon Kevin as he brings us a lesson this morning. And we have a clear thinking to understand, and we clearly understand your word. We thank you for the word. We thank you for this time together. We pray in Christ's name.
Okay, so we're on Revelation 17, and this is some of the main points there that are in the chapter. But like I've said in previous weeks, I want to make sure that you see where we are in the framework of Revelation. So that's why I keep going back and saying, well, remember we did this, this, and this, and now we're doing this. So I want you to be sure and see that. And so what I have here on the first page is similar to what I had last time, but I just wanted to touch on Revelation 15 and 16 before we get into 17, just as a reminder. So at the top of the page, Revelation 15 was the prelude to the 7 bowl judgments. Remember, it's kind of like, okay, we're going to get ready for the 7 bowl judgments, and then it goes blah, 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 and all those verses there. And, of course, the 7 bowl judgments were about the 7 angels who had the 7 plagues, which are the last. Remember, even back in chapter 15, those are the last plagues, because in them the wrath of God is finished, it says, in verse 1 of chapter 15. So that means we're getting to the end of things. And then in Revelation 16 is the actual 7 bowl judgments that the 7 angels poured out. And a loud voice came out of the temple saying, "It is done." So at the end of chapter 16, it says, after he pours out all 7 bowls, he says, "It is done." So twice we're getting this idea that it is done. And it is done, then your question is, what is done, right? It's God's formal judgments are done at the end of chapter 16. So the 3rd bowl judgment was on the throne of the beast, probably his throne and kingdom centered in the rebuilt city of Babylon on the Euphrates River, which we talked about before. The 6th angel poured out his bowl in the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings. So clear back in this early part of chapter 16 is about the Euphrates River being dried up so the armies can come in, right? So the armies can come in. Then Satan and his agents released the 3 unclean spirits, meaning demons, and go out to gather the kings of the east together. So clear back in 16 is kind of giving us an introduction to what's going to happen later, right? So what's going to happen later is in chapter 19 when the second coming of Christ, remember, when all the armies are gathered and all the armies from the east. And last time we had that map that showed the armies that would come, and we didn't say exactly which country they came from, but we said definitely they came from the east, and we showed the map clear from China to Russia and all of those countries east of Jerusalem. And then the Babylon the Great, like the city of the nations, remembered for God to give her Babylon the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath, like those who have the mark of the beast. The great city Babylon is the religious, government, commercial, and sin center of the Antichrist kingdom, and she will receive a special outpouring of God's wrath as detailed in chapter 17 and chapter 18. So, focusing on these 2 chapters of 17 and 18, John has given more detail about Babylon the Great and the Beast. Babylon is spoken of as already fallen. Fallen is Babylon the Great. First, Babylon's judgment because of her immorality and her abominations. Second, the mystery of the woman Babylon and the mystery of the beast Antichrist are explained. The mystery of the beast is explained first in those verses. Then the mystery of the woman, the great city Babylon, is explained in the second in that one verse, verse 18. So this is like when a person tells you what they accomplished each day of the week and then goes back and explains in more detail what happened on certain days of that week. That's what chapter 17 and 18 are about. I tell you what I did on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? And then I go, oh, by the way, remember on Tuesday? I want to tell you some more about what happened on Tuesday. And then I want to tell you some more about what happened on Wednesday. So that's what 17 and 18 are. They're a further explanation of what occurred previously in chapter 16. You see? And it's amazing how much detail they have about Babylon. It's amazing. So when you give a lot of detail about something, and God reveals a lot of detail about something, then God wants you to know a lot about something, right? He wants you to know a lot about this Babylon. All this occurred after the beast comes on the scene in Revelation 13, verse 1. Remember, he comes on the scene then? Which begins his 42 months, which it says in verse 5 of chapter 13. All of this fits into the last 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation leading up to the second coming of Christ. And so we're going to do this chart here that we've done a couple of times. In fact, we did it last week to remind you of the framework of Revelation, right? Remember, there was the early part of Revelation there in chapter 1. And from verse 19, which we keep saying right here, you see, verse 19, things you have seen, things which are, things which take place. Things which take place are from chapter 4 to chapter 22. That will take place. Will means future, okay? Will take place. All these things we've been studying all these weeks, we're clear into here, right? The next chart there is taking the third part of the chart we just looked at, stretching it out here and adding more detail, because some of this I'm hoping will answer some of those questions you've asked in the last few weeks. Okay? So here is from chapter 4 to chapter 22, all of these things, and within that is all of this stuff. Okay? See, down here is chapter 4 to 22, but I stretched out and I added the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, 7 bowl judgments. Then I added Babylon in chapter 17 and Babylon in chapter 18. And then in chapter 19 is the second coming. So you have the 7-year covenant with Daniel. We got that from Daniel 9:27. Then you have 3.5 years of peace, and then 3.5 years of abomination and persecution of Israel. The time, the 3.5 years, comes from Daniel, like we said many times before, and also it's in Revelation 3 or 4 times about the 3.5 years, explained as 1,260 days, as 42 months, as time and a half, okay? The 7-year tribulation, Daniel 9:17, or 27. 3.5 years, right there in Revelation chapter 6 through 13. And then from chapter 13 to 19 is the second 3.5 years. That's what I think it is. Mostly, and one of the best evidence is what I just said a minute ago, because in chapter 13 it says that the beast, the Antichrist, comes on the scene and for 42 months, which it says in verse 5. And 42 months he's on the scene until when? Till he's not on the scene. When is he not on the scene? Chapter 19. Christ takes him, throws him into the pit, right? Chapter 19. So you got the beast here in the first 3.5 years, and you have the beast here in the second 3.5 years. But the first 3.5 years, he's at peace with Israel in the covenant. He's at peace. He got a 7-year. He said, okay, I come in your class. I'm gonna make a 7-year covenant with you. And it's all gonna be great. We're gonna get along, and I'm gonna do everything for you, and you're gonna do everything for me, and I'll let you be in charge, and make all this agreement. But in the middle of 3.5 years, he stands up in the temple and proclaims himself to be God. Stop sacrifice for Israel. He's the abomination of desolation that Paul talks about, that Daniel talks about, that John talks about in Revelation. He's the one, okay? Then he breaks, then he does the abomination of desolation by standing up in the temple, and then he begins to persecute Israel. Before that, he didn't persecute Israel. He had a peace covenant with them. Yeah, everything's great. Don't worry. I'm with you. Oh, you're not with me. Oh, you're persecuting us, right? So it's hard to see in Revelation. If you just do a casual reading through Revelation, you've read through it 2 or 3 times, you're like, oh, it's really hard. Let me see how. But I feel confident about this time schedule and how it all works together. Once you include Daniel and you understand Daniel and those time schedules in Daniel, once you understand those, when you get to Revelation and see Revelation is pointing back to Daniel and pointing back to those time schedules in Daniel, then Revelation is confirming Daniel and is fulfilling what Daniel said. Okay, so we're going to move on. Next page. Someone want to read chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. Verses 1 through 7 of chapter 17.
And one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits in many waters. With whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And the angel said to me, Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Okay, so in this one paragraph of these 7 verses, we get a huge amount of information, right? We get huge amount of information. The problem is understanding what the information means, right? But what's really good about 17, and chapter 17 is, it not only presents the problem, the mystery, but it also reveals what the mystery means. Okay, and I'm going to go into more detail as we go along. Verse 1, then one of the 7 angels who had and carried out the 7 bowl judgments. This angel is one of the 7 angels who had the 7 plagues of the wrath of God in those verses. This angel came and spoke with John, saying, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot. Oh, we're going to see the judgment of the harlot. The great harlot is the woman on the scarlet beast in verse 3, and that woman is said to be the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth in verse 18, which is Babylon the Great in verse 5. John is to be shown the judgment of the great harlot, the city
of Babylon the Great, verse 5, or verse 1. But the angel in Revelation 14:8 had already said, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. The judgment of Babylon had not occurred yet in chapter 14, but the past tense fallen expresses a future occurrence as though it had already occurred. And here's some other examples where it's done in the Old Testament. So we commented on that in chapter 14 when we went over that. So basically in chapter 14 it says, fallen is Babylon the Great. And there's like, well, I don't see it fallen. It didn't say it's fallen. It's like, no, it's a done deal because God said it was a done deal. It's fallen. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you about it in the next couple chapters. And that's what he does. That's what the angels and the different people reveal to John over the next few chapters. The harlot Babylon, who sits on many waters, verse 1, these many waters are explained in verse 15. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So I'm kind of giving you all the answers here up front before we even get to the verses, right? So I could have done it the other way. I could have just done it and saying, oh, I wonder what it means, and moved on. But I'm giving you what the answers are, and the answers are right here in chapter 17. They're in the context. They're in the near context. Remember what I said in lesson 4, that context is king. It rules over all other parts of biblical interpretation. It rules. Context is king. You don't read a verse in any passage of Scripture anywhere and then say, okay, let me see, what does it mean? Leave that passage, go far, far away to another part of the Bible, or even to another book outside the Bible. The book outside the Bible, they call them extra biblical books outside the Bible. Get the answer to your question there. Bring that information back into the context of the verse you're working on and saying, see, that's what it means. That's taking it out of context. That is what they call, which I said when we talked about context, is a pretext for a proof text, which I gave the definition was a pretended reason, not the real reason why you're bringing that information from another source in. And usually it's because, well, my theology says that, or my favorite person I know said that, or my favorite pastor, or my favorite teacher, or whatever said that. So I can't go by what it says. I have to go find something and bring it in and go, oh, there it is. See, I told you, I brought it in. Now that sounds like, well, aren't they being deceptive? And I go, well, they don't say they are being deceptive. But I'm just telling you that happens over and over and over and over again. So I'm telling you, at least in this class, that you should not go outside the context and make claims that aren't in the passage. If you do, you have to say, I know it doesn't say that, and I know it doesn't mean that, but I think it does mean that after all. You see what I mean? Go ahead.
I heard an interesting quote this week that if you take the text out of the context, you're left with con.
Yeah. 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 It's good. I mean, I went over this in lesson 4, interpretation. That's why it's so important. Like I always said, if you want to play a game with me, you want to play checkers or football or whatever, we got to have the same rules, don't we? We can't play the game, right? So if someone else comes in this class and says, well, I think it's, then my question for them is, how did you come to that conclusion? You see? And they may give me a good answer, they may not, or something. But what that does is it puts them on them to show how they came to that conclusion. That's really important. Moving down. The harlot Babylon, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of earth have committed acts of immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. And the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they, the kings, see the smoke of her burning. So you see I'm quoting from chapter 18, those verses, because chapter 18 is about Babylon. Chapter 17 is about Babylon. So I'm just taking a few verses from there to bring them into chapter 17 so you can better understand it. Next page. Those who dwell on earth, the unbelievers who received the mark of the beast, in those verses, were made drunk with the wine of her, meaning the harlot Babylon's immorality. So, a person drunk with immorality is one dominated by intense immorality based on God's laws. Drunk, meaning dominated by intense feelings, like it says in Webster's dictionary, okay? So normally, if you look, like I even looked up drunk in the dictionary, and they go, well, that's when a person has too much alcohol. And I looked up another definition, and they say, that's when a person has too much alcohol. But see, that's how we normally talk about it, and that's definitely true. That's definitely true. But in this case, it's drunk with immorality, intoxicated with intense immorality is what this Babylon is noted for. Okay? Moving down, then the angel carried away John in the spirit into the wilderness. John in the spirit refers to the exalted spiritual state brought on by the Holy Spirit that he was in, so he could hear, see those things which are about to be revealed to him. Then John saw a woman, and the woman being the harlot, Babylon the city, as mentioned in verse 18, gives you the interpretation in verse 18, sitting on the scarlet beast. The scarlet beast is the beast you saw is not, and is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction in verse 8. Also in Revelation 13:3, I, John, saw one of the dragon's heads had been slain, his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed following that. So this verse there about who was, is not, is about to come, is about when the Antichrist is killed and then comes back to life. Okay? In those verses right there. Fatal wound, with a sword, then was healed, and all the people cheered and had a party because they're going, gosh, I thought our great leader was destroyed, but look, he came back to life like the two witnesses. Our person we worship, the Antichrist, look at, he can do all these things. And then it says, and they worshiped him even more because they believed in him because he had these great powers. Moving down, John saw the scarlet beast, the Antichrist, all one and the same thing, full of blasphemous names, like the beast with blasphemous names in Revelation 13:1, who spoke blasphemies, as it says in verse 6. John saw the scarlet beast, the Antichrist, having 7 heads and 10 horns. We have explained the 7 heads and 10 horns many times previously. Remember all the charts I showed you? I almost thought of bringing them in again. I showed you like 3 times in those verses in Daniel 2. And in Daniel 7, you can go to lessons 11 and 22 to see all of those if you want to see those again. And the dragon in chapter 12, and the beast in chapter 13, 17, so on in those verses. In Daniel 2, you had the 10 toes that are 10 kings. In Daniel 7, you have the 10 horns that are 10 kings. In Revelation 13, you have the 10 horns, which are 10 diadems, which are crowns as kings. And in Revelation 17 here, we have 10 horns, which are 10 kings. So what I'm thinking is that 10 horns are 10 kings. That's what I'm thinking, okay? Because it's confirmed so many times that, but yet you read commentaries on Revelation, they go, well, maybe it's not, And they go off on the stuff because they don't want to go there. So just to confirm it some more, I talked about the little horn in Daniel 7, because we're talking about, remember these 10 kings and keeping track of them? I just took this out of when we did Daniel 7. As for the 10 horns out of this fourth kingdom, 10 kings will arise. Another horn, 11th king, will arise after them, meaning after the 10 kings. And he, the 11th king, will be different from the previous 10 kings. And that 11th king will subdue 3 kings, 3 of the 10 kings. That leaves 7, right? He, the 11th king, will speak out against the Most High, and the 11th king will wear down the saints of the Most High, and he, the 11th king, will intend to make alterations in times and law, and they, the saints, will be given to his hand, the 11th king's hand, for time and a half. Oh, there's the 3.5 years again, back in Daniel chapter 7. So I'm coming to this conclusion here. So what I'm doing is I'm coming to a conclusion. I'm telling you basically what chapter 17 is about, and then I'm going to further explain it in more detail. The woman is surely the harlot Babylon city in verse 18, sitting on a scarlet beast. The woman is a city, Babylon, a city called Babylon, okay? The scarlet beast is most definitely the beast, the Antichrist. All those verses there. I mean, we've talked about it all along, that we know the beast is the Antichrist. So God saw the city of Babylon sitting on the beast, the Antichrist, or seated on what the God represents. Because you're saying, there's this city, and it's sitting on this beast, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, but it's like, how does that work? And so what I have highlighted there in yellow, the seated on what the beast represents. Okay, so I'm going to explain that, okay? So what that means is like the seat of government. When I say the seat of government or the county seat or whatever, what am I saying? Am I talking about a chair? Am I talking about a person sitting down on a chair or something? No. So it's that kind of seat I think it's talking about here, okay? Sitting on the beast. The woman, the city of Babylon, was clothed in purple and scarlet, and we'll talk about some more of that as we later on in this lesson. The woman, the city of Babylon, was clothed in purple and scarlet. The woman clothed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, speaks of her Babylon's colors of royalty, nobility, wealth, and that of the merchants of Babylon. She not only has those things, she's noted for those things. The city of Babylon is noted for those things, those luxurious items that the merchants of Babylon sell. Most of that about the merchants is in chapter 18. We'll get to that next week. Buy and sell to make themselves wealthy. So we're going to read chapter 18, verses 11 through 17, just to confirm that. Chapter 18, verse 11. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and every article made from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and the cargoes of the horses and chariots and sleighs and human lives. And the fruit you long for has gone from you, and all things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you. Men will no longer find them. So we are saying that because in chapter 18, it's a done deal. It's already gone away. The city has already gone away. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment and weeping and mourning, saying, woe, woe to the great city who has clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones. For in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste, and every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor, and as many as make their living at the sea stood at a distance. So we're going to get into that more next week, but you see how this long list of all the things the merchants sold through the city of Babylon that identified her with Babylon. So I'm going to move down. The woman having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations means she, Babylon, glorifies herself instead of God and is full of things that are offensive to God. So if we read verse 5 in chapter 17, it says, upon her forehead was written a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Abominations in both verses. Okay, so the woman having in her hand a gold cup of abomination means glorifies herself instead of God as full things that are offensive to God, and we just read that verse. And the woman having a golden cup of unclean things of her, Babylon's immorality. 14:8, I'm going to read, see what it says there. Another angel, second one, following, saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. Okay? And those other verses talk about that too that I have listed there. So when it says it has a cup full, it doesn't mean that, well, the vision has a cup, but the cup means it's full of all of these immoralities and abominations. She's noted for it. And what do you do with a cup? You drink it. Okay? But you're going, how can you drink abominations and immoralities? How does that work, right? Okay? So that works because it means taking in those things. She's known for taking in those things. Even remember in the Gospels, they talk about Christ. You must eat my flesh and my blood. And then they said, well, eat flesh and blood? That's crazy, right? No, he was talking about you must take me in, all of me, my flesh and my blood. You should take it upon you, bring it into yourself. So we'll go on to the next page. And we got this chart here. Okay, so this is just kind of review of what we just kind of came to some conclusions on, and we can talk about them some more. But so, verse 1, the great harlot sits on many waters. There she is. She's got the cup, see, right here, the cup. Okay. Then, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations. That's where I get that from. That's my interpretation. Why is it my interpretation? Because it's in the text. It's right. It says right there. You don't have to let me see. Waters. Oh, maybe it could be this. Maybe. You don't have to do any maybes. It says right there. Gives you the answer. The woman you saw is the great city Babylon who reigns over the kings of the earth. So that's what I'm thinking. Not because I made it up, not because I dreamed it up or I read it in a commentary, because it says in verse 18. That's a quote from verse 18, right there. Now, let's talk about who the beast is. Okay? So, the scarlet beast, full of blasphemous name, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Here's the 7 heads. Here's the 10 horns, right? Up here, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings. So I'm thinking the 10 horns are 10 kings because it says in verse 12. It interprets itself. Chapter 17 interprets itself. You don't need to go anywhere else, okay? The 7 heads are the 7 mountains which a woman sits, and they are 7 kings. verses 9 and 10. Says it again, twice. The beast you saw was and was not, is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. Verse 8, the scarlet beast is the beast, the Antichrist, and all those different ones. So we said this was referring back to the previous chapters where the Antichrist is killed with the sword and comes back to life. Okay? So that's where I get that. So what's interesting to me in Reformed theology, and like when I'm reading these, I got all these other commentaries with all these different views, and I look at it and I'm kind of like, whoa, that's a different view. They say, Reformed theology, non-literal, post-millennial view says, Babylon equals Rome. Babylon equals Rome. And that 7 heads with 7 kings equals 7 Roman emperors from the first century. So they say, really, this whole chapter is all about Rome in the first century, and all this has already occurred. It already occurred in the past. In fact, all of chapter 4, clear up to this point, has all occurred in the past. A third of the earth was killed, and all the waters were poisoned, the ocean and the fresh water. They say, well, waters doesn't mean water, and ocean doesn't mean ocean, and poison doesn't mean poison, and Babylon doesn't mean Babylon, and you see what I mean? It's moving down. On her, the city of Babylon's forehead was a name written a mystery. The city of Babylon is identified by a name written on her forehead as Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, of all the abominations of the earth, in verse 1. The city of Babylon is the mother of harlots, the foremost of all places that sells itself. In chapter 18, verse 3, I'll read that real quick. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. Kind of repeated the same thing, but with more detail. Okay? Okay, the city of Babylon is the mother of the abominations of the earth, the foremost of all places where abominations are. These things are morally detestable to God, and they're morally detestable to God. So the woman is identified with a name on her forehead. Now, we know all about names on the forehead because we studied those before, right? Like the bondservants have a name on their forehead in Revelation 7 and 14. Like the earth dwellers who have a name on their forehead, right, in Revelation 13. And a mystery is something unknown before, but now revealed here in chapter 17 and explained in those verses there. Moving down, then John saw the woman, the city of Babylon, drunk with the blood of the saints. The city of Babylon, drunk with the blood of the saints, is where her overindulgent shedding of the blood of the saints is associated with. The city of Babylon is drunk with the blood of the witnesses of the saints. So it even says it twice in a different way. These saints and witnesses of Jesus are killed tribulation saints who overcome. Chapter 18, verse 24. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints and all who have been slain on the earth. Whoa! That gives you exactly what it is, right? Doesn't verse 24 of chapter 18 tell you exactly what it is? Okay. When John saw her, the city of Babylon, he wondered greatly. Of course he did. He doesn't have the interpretation yet, even though I've explained the interpretation and showed you he hasn't given the interpretation yet. John wondered greatly what the mystery concerning the woman on the scarlet bed means. So, a mystery is presented. He wonders what it means. The angel says, why wonder? Why wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast. So you're about to get told what all of this means. Then in response, the angel said to him, why do you wonder? And the angel will tell you the mystery of the woman Babylon, and I will tell you the mystery of the beast who carries her in those verses. Which beast has the 7 heads and 10 horns in those verses? So remember on the previous page, I explained all of this, where all those 10 horns and all that, we just talked about it a minute ago. Then John saw a woman, the harlot beast, sitting on a scarlet beast. The scarlet beast is the beast you saw, was, is not, is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction in verse 8. And we explained that previously. Someone want to read verses 8 through 14 of chapter 17. 8 through 14, chapter 17. Okay. Okay. Then the angel reveals to John the mystery of the woman Babylon. Oh, mystery? Mystery explained. And the mystery of the beast, the Antichrist that carries her, that John wondered greatly about in verse 6. First, the angel explains who the beast that John saw in verse 3 was. Who the beast was is explained. We have said all along the beast is the Antichrist. Also, the beast, Antichrist, has 10 horns and 7 heads that represent the kings, represent kings in those verses. And the angel says the beast was, is not, is about to come out of the abyss and go to destruction. This is when the beast had a fatal wound of a sword and was healed and came to life in those verses there. This is interpreted by the angel in verse 11 of chapter 17. The beast was and was not himself an 8th king, who is one of the 7 kings. And the 8th king goes to destruction in those verses. Then the beast will come out of the abyss where he is from in chapter 11, verse 7, and where Satan is from, who gives him his power, and the beast will go to destruction when Christ comes. So this is given a preview of coming attractions, right? When Christ comes, the beast will be destroyed in chapter 19. And those who dwell on the earth, the unbelievers whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. See lesson 8, we talked about this a lot. Unbelievers will wonder when they see the beast, and he was and is not and will come, when the beast had a fatal wound of the sword and was healed and came to life. So we'll move on. The angel says, here's the mind which has wisdom. Now, you have wisdom when something's given to you, right? Especially wisdom meaning it's correct wisdom or true wisdom. And he's explaining in detail about the kings. In detail. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman Babylon sits. That's what it says. And they, the 7 heads, which are also 7 mountains, are 7 kings. So this is where some of the confusion comes in. Some people say, oh, the 7 heads are 7 mountains. They leave the text, they go far, far away, they dig out a history book that's not in the Bible, and they say, aha, that's Rome, about the 7 hills in Rome. Is that what the text says? Doesn't say that there, does it? It gives you 2 different meanings for the 7 heads, okay? It says the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the Babylon sits, and they are 7 kings. The 7 mountains are 7 kings, right? The first definition, in which the woman sits, are 7 kings, okay? Then he goes on to explain about the 7 kings. 5 kings have fallen. So you got 7, 5 fell. 1 king is, one of the 2 kings left is, the other king has not come yet, or yet come. And when that king comes, he must remain for a little while. So the 7 heads are 7 mountains. The 7 heads are also 7 kings. The 7 heads are those kings which the woman sits. So the woman is sitting on 7 kings. Sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? But we explained what that represents, right? And even what I didn't read up there, it said, right after it says 7 mountains, the mountains represent kingdoms. So when you talk about kings or kingdoms, you're talking pretty much the same thing, right? It's the kingdom of the king or the king's kingdom, or the king, if you say, oh, he's the king of that country, he's the king of that kingdom. Okay? So the woman, Babylon, sits on the scarlet beast having 7 heads and 10 horns. This scarlet beast is most definitely the beast, the Antichrist, in those versions. So the conclusion I came to was the 7 heads kings equals 7 mountain kingdoms equals the 7 kings of the beast and the Antichrist, who is the 8th king that is over the 7 kings. Okay? So John saw the city of Babylon sitting on the beast, or seated on what the beast represents. So I said this before, remember? Like I said, the county seat or the seat of the place of authority or the place of government. The angel says the city of Babylon, the woman, sits on the 7 kings, the beast, the Antichrist. The beast in Daniel is the 8th king after he subdues 3 of 10 kings. We just read that, leaving 7 kings. The beast is the 8th king, as it says 2 verses later in verse 11. The beast, which was and is not, is himself almost an 8th king and one of the 7. There it is. Says it. Now back to our text, verse 9, 10. Concerning the 7 kings. 5 kings of the 7 kings have fallen, meaning they've been killed or destroyed somehow, and 2 kings are left. The 1 king of 7 kings still exists. This king is one of the 2 kings that are left after the 7 kings. The other king of 7 kings has not yet come, has not arisen or come to the forefront. This king is the other of the 2 kings that are left. And when the king of the 7 kings, comes, he will remain just a little while. Now, I want to know exactly who those are, and what their name is, and what country they're from, and when they were born, and when they died, and everything about them. But it doesn't tell you anything. But there's this. So remember, clear back in Daniel, you got all the kings, right? And clear back in Daniel, they talk about 3 of them are taken out or subdued. It says back there in Daniel, it says they were subdued, okay? So The 10 kings come on the scene first, and they're like all this power. And then this 11th king, the Antichrist, comes, and he kind of partners with them. And they, yeah, man, we're together. We're together. And then he kind of takes out 3 of them. Then only leaves 7 left. Then there's only 7. Oh. And then later on, right towards the end, after he's had all the advantage of them being on his side, he eventually takes them out. He knocks them out, man. Because he wants to be the King of Kings. He doesn't want to share any glory with any of the rest of the kings, right? He wants to be like Jesus. Jesus is the King of Kings that we just read, right? He wants to be the King of Kings too. But guess what? He's not, because it even says in the verse, the King of Kings comes and destroys him. So down there is exactly the same as I read on the previous page, which those verses that show what I just talked about, how the 10 horns and or the 10 kings, the 7 kings, and so forth. Moving down. The beast, the Antichrist, was and is not, and is the beast in Revelation 13. This is when the beast had a fatal wound of a sword and was healed and came to life. He himself, or is himself, the beast, the Antichrist, also the 8th king, is one of that belongs to the 7 kings, and he, the Antichrist, goes to destruction, will go to destruction when Christ comes in Revelation 19. Moving down, the 10 horned kings, which you saw in Revelation 17, are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom. Okay, you have to read all those. And so I'll read verse 16. I think it helps us understand that a little bit. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and burn her up with fire. Ooh. These will hate the harlot. So if the harlot is Babylon, these, right? Oh, I hate Babylon, these 10 kings and the Antichrist. And I go, well, wait a minute. Babylon's bad. Antichrist is bad, and the 10 kings are bad. They're all evil, right? So you got evil destroying evil. How can you reconcile that? Because it explains it in the text. And we're going to read it here in a few minutes. Okay. But they, the kings, receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. So we'll read verse 10 on chapter 18. Standing in a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, woe, 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 the great city of Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour her judgment has come. So that's how the 1 hour is confirmed in chapter 18, the same as it's confirmed in chapter 17. 1 hour does not mean 60 minutes. It means a period of time for an event. 1 hour, a period of time for an event, is in all those verses. And that reminds me of like Jesus in the Gospels. He says, my hour has not come, meaning to go to the cross, right? And then, right before that, Jason taught last week in John 17, he said right before that, my hour has come to go to the cross, okay? So he wasn't talking about my 60 minutes that I'm going to spend on the cross. It's nothing about that. It's the hour or the time of the event, not 60 minutes. These 10 kings have one purpose, and they, kings, give their power and authority to the beast. Oh. The kings say, I'll tell you what, Antichrist, we'll submit to you and give you all of our power and let you be in charge. Let's move to the next page. These 10 kings will wage war against the Lamb. Chapter 16, verse 12. Let's see if I have that there. 16, verse 12. The 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, and the water was dried up, that the way might be prepared for the kings of the east. So remember last time we had the map of the kings of the east with that arrow shown coming there? Okay. The Lamb will overcome them. Where does it say that? Chapter 19, verse 19. And they saw the beast, same context, the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was seized, and with him and the false prophet performed the signs in his presence by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshiped the beast. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire which burns. So this is telling you ahead of time what's going to happen in chapter 19. The Lamb will overcome because, here's the reason, whenever you see because, the conjunction, you're going to get a reason, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. Jesus is going to overcome. No one messes with the King of kings. No one messes with the Lord of lords, right? Look, all these people want to be, well, no, I'm king, I'm the King of kings, I'm the strongest king, I'm the biggest king, I'm the most powerful king, I'm the most wealthy king, I have the most possessions. Wimpy. Nothing. And those believers are with him, those in fine white linen on white horses. Well, it's telling us that believers with him in fine linen and white horses. Where do we read that? In chapter 19, verse 14. And the armies which were in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white, clean, were following him on white horses. So believers were following Christ on white horses, right? That's the second coming. It's talking about the second coming. Those believers are the called and chosen and faithful. That's what believers are. In all those verses, you read them up, it reaffirms that. So someone want to read verses 15 through 18. Get us to the end. Verses 15 through 18 of chapter 17.
And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast, will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth.
Okay. So then the angel said to John, further explaining the vision of the woman sitting on a scarlet beast. The waters which you saw were where the harlot, meaning the woman, sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. It tells you exactly what the image is, the visions are. Here the angel explains that the harlot woman that sits on the waters, which represent peoples, multitudes, tongues, and nations, meaning all peoples and nations on earth. The harlot woman, Babylon city, sits on, or she is the world commerce seat which reigns over the kings of the earth. Also, she is the seat of immorality and the merchants of the kings of the earth. So Babylon is the world's seat. She is the world's seat. The harlot is the world's seat. It's the seat of the government of the world. Moving down, the angel said the 10 horned or 10 kings which you saw, the beast, the Antichrist, these 10 kings plus Antichrist, will hate the harlot. Wait a minute, remember I said before? You got evil people hating evil people. The Antichrist and his 10 allied kings will hate the great city of Babylon, which reigns over the kings of the earth. These 10 kings have one purpose: to give their power and authority to the beast. They will make the great city of Babylon desolate and naked, meaning exposed and ashamed. They will eat the great Babylon's flesh. This may be like Revelation 19:18, where their flesh is eaten. So in Revelation 19, they have what they call the Great Supper of God, where God calls all the birds, and then he destroys all the men on earth, the huge millions of armies, and they're all laying dead. And then the birds all come and eat their flesh. It may refer to that. And they will burn the great city of Babylon up with fire. Babylon will be burned with fire. Babylon will have plagues, pestilence, mourning, and famine. All that's getting from chapter 18. Babylon will have great wealth laid to waste. Antichrist and his 10 kings will do all this, but it is part of God judging the harlot Babylon. All this occurs during the last 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period beginning in Revelation 13. Okay, last page. Then the angel said, "For God has put it in the 10 kings and the Antichrist's hearts to execute his purpose. These kings have one purpose, to give their power and authority to the beast." The 10 kings gave their power to the beast because, here comes the reason, God put it in their hearts to execute his purpose. This is like when God hardens Pharaoh's heart for his purposes, where it says, "But I will harden Pharaoh's heart that I may multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt." Another verse is, "Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he will chase after them, and I will be honored," God will be honored, "through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am Lord." And they did so in Exodus 14. Sometimes God hardens people to accomplish his purposes. You're going, "Well, Lord, I'm kind of thinking I have a better idea how to do it." But it doesn't work that way. God decides. Sometimes God doesn't harden anybody for maybe hundreds of years, and all of a sudden you're going, "Yep, for my purposes, I'm going to harden somebody at this point to accomplish things." And so there's a lot to understand about hardening in the Bible. The 10 kings, by having common purpose, meaning God's purpose, and by giving the king's earth kingdom, or the great city of Babylon, to the beast, to the Antichrist, and judging her. 17:1 says, where we started out, "And one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, 'Come here, and I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters.'" Oh, the judgment of the great harlot. The great harlot is Babylon, right? We said a bunch of times. Then here, when we talk about God's purpose, I always get back to this verse. Man, I think in every study I do this like 3 times. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but down there in verse 10 it says, "My purpose will be established. I will accomplish my good pleasure," meaning God's will, "calling a bird of prey from the east and the man of purpose from far country. Truly I have spoken, I will bring it to pass. I have planned it, and I will do it." Okay? These verses tell you a lot about God. God isn't willy-nilly. He isn't random. He isn't throwing darts deciding what he's going to do next. He's got a plan, and he planned it ahead of time. He will bring it to pass, and he will do it. It says right in these verses. Moving down, then the angel said, "The woman harlot whom you saw is the great city Babylon, which," the great city Babylon, "reigns over the kings of the earth." Oh, so this city reigns over the kings of the earth, but the Antichrist and the 10 kings come and conquer them and take them out, right? Because the Antichrist doesn't want anybody in charge but himself. And we know that from these verses here. Let's read these verses and it'll help us to understand. Chapter 16, the great city Jerusalem was split into 3 parts, and the city of the nations fell. Then it says, Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. This is clear back in chapter 16. Chapter 18 says, For all the nations have drunk, meaning taken in, the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. So that one verse kind of tells the whole story about Babylon, doesn't it? Also in verse 9, and the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality live sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning. Okay? So the kings of the earth, or the kingdoms of the earth, committed acts of immorality with her and lived sensuously with her and wept and lament because they poured themselves into her, all their money, their time, their wealth, their investments, everything is associated with her, and they became wealthy from it, and there's these wealthy merchants, and then they lose it all in the smoke of it coming up. Finally, in Revelation 19, beginning of Revelation 19 is still talking about Babylon. Because his judgments are true and righteous, he has judged the great harlot who has corrupted the earth with her immorality, and he has avenged the blood of the bondservants. So when do we remember the bondservants' blood needing to be revenged? Do you remember? Way back in Seal 5, when the believers were underneath the altar in heaven. They said, Lord, Lord, when are you going to avenge our blood? When are you going to avenge that? And then what does it say back there in the Seal 5 and in Revelation 6? It said, wait here for a little while until the rest of your saints, I don't know if he uses the word killed or whatever, but the rest of your saints go through this same thing. So a little while has occurred, and here we are, right? We're getting right to Revelation 19 when Jesus comes. And then at the bottom there, I have this chart that I've did before, clear in the early lessons, as a reminder of prophecy interpretation. And I call it a key, one of the key things to remember about prophecy. Prophecy often interprets itself. Chapter 17 is a perfect example. Gives you a bizarre vision, right? Like a woman on a beast, that's weird. But then someone interprets what it means. So right after that interprets what it means. It says who the harlot is. It says who the scarlet beast is. Explains it in detail. It interprets it all. Interpretation often interprets itself. In Revelation, as in the Old Testament Gospels, a vision, mystery, or figure of speech is often presented. Then its literal interpretation is given in the following text or near context by the author John, who is told by the angel in chapter 17. All visions, mysteries, and figures of speech are non-fictional and have a literal intent. So, remember, when I talked about this before, they're non-fictional. You have to make a decision when you read the Bible, is this fiction or non-fiction? Once you say it's non-fiction, then it has a literal intent, right? But how do you know for sure it has a literal intent? Because when these weird visions are given, they're interpreted literally in normal terms that you can understand. Remember the key one that I talked about before was Joseph, clear back in Genesis 40, where he had the vision of the baker and the cupbearer. They had these weird visions. They go, I don't know what this means. And go to Joseph. He knows how to interpret those. Okay? So they go to Joseph, and Joseph goes, I'll go back and pray about it and sleep on it, and then I'll come back. He tells them, okay, this is a little interpretation of the cupbearers there, and then here's the literal interpretation of the other one, right? Then, as part of that interpretation, he says it'll happen in 3 days, right? What happens 3 days later? One's killed, and the other one goes to be back with the king. So what I love about that example, clear back in Genesis 40, is you have the bizarre vision, the interpretation of the bizarre vision. You have a lag of time, in this case, just a couple of days. It's not like hundreds of years or thousands of years. And then you have a literal completion or the literal enactment of what that interpretation was. So you have the beginning, you have the middle, you have the end. A literal event took place after 3 days with Joseph, okay? So, yes?
So, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
Just to summarize things, so the harlot is Babylon, and it's a city. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, it's actually a city.
That's what I think, yeah.
Yeah. And when it's riding on the beast is the Antichrist and the 10 kings. Riding or sitting on the beast, is that they're ruling, controlling the 10 kings and the Antichrist at that time? Or I guess what does it mean, when you say it's like the seat of government or seat of, what do you see that the city is, I guess that's...
Okay, so more about that. Okay, so I comment a little bit about it and give you a lot of detail. So I think it sits on what the beast represents. So what does the beast represent, the scarlet beast? It represents the Antichrist, who is pretty much of Satan and the 10 kings,
Yeah.
right? It sits on that like they're together. It's like the foundation of what the city represents. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain
Right.
it.
I guess, and I was trying more
Sure.
literal, so it's a city that where all commerce and stuff
Sure.
are, but it says it also rules those kings, but then the kings and the Antichrist hate it as well. So I was just
Well, no, part of that it says the city is ruled by all the kings of the earth, not to be confused with the 11 kings, okay? It rules all the kings of the earth. So just think of this super city, head of commerce, government, sin, immorality, whatever you want to call it, and is super powerful and wealthy and rich and luxurious, and it kind of like the center of the whole world that everybody goes to do everything, right? It's like if you have to pick one thing on earth, that's it, right? And so, but what it sits on is the immorality of the Antichrist, Satan, all that. It's the county seat of it. It's the world seat of government that's foundation is on those things. Now, what I didn't mention is a lot of people going, well, the city of Babylon now is nothing. You go there now in Iraq or by the Euphrates River, there's nothing there. So my view, which is not every commentator thinks this, my view is there will be a great city of Babylon when Jesus comes at that time. It doesn't say
in
when.
the location in Iraq.
Yeah. City of Babylon in Iraq. I think there will be a great city there like that. And some people go, well, maybe it's Dubai, because Dubai's kind of near there. And maybe it's here, maybe it's there. It doesn't say for sure, but there will be this super city that has this great power and wealth. And of course, the Antichrist, whenever he sees anything around him that is as powerful as him or near as powerful, what's the first thing he's going to do? I think I'll take him out, man. I'll take him out. And it doesn't take it out just because it's his idea. It even says, for God's purpose, he made them do that or hardened their hearts so they would do that. You're like, so it all fits into God's plan. But there's a lot more that could be said about that city, but just trying to picture a city sitting on a a beast is
Sure.
difficult,
No, that's-
but anyway.
Yeah, just the relationship with the Antichrist and the city is kind of what I was
Yeah.
struggling with, with the sitting on it, and then it hated it later, and so then
Sure.
it's like I was trying to,
Yeah, it's the foundation of what he sits on. Yeah, that's the best way I can say it. Is the foundation of the city is the Antichrist and sin and immorality. So we probably need to wind up. Did you have a last question?
Well, just a lot of kind of what you're describing, and I don't know why, not to make
Sure.
an accusation or anything, but doesn't it sound a little bit like an entity that we currently have known as the United Nations? We have this entity that actually wants the end of all sovereign governments, and they want everyone to be a member state. They have a lot of different rules and laws that are contrary to some of the laws of these individual states, whether it's about abortion, whether it's about drug use, whether it's about slavery or that
Sure.
sort of thing. So this is like an entity that has all these different members. Now, Antichrist doesn't want them to be in charge. At some point, maybe, right now, we have a lot of member states, and some of those are pretty powerful nations. They sit on the Security Council of that.
Sure.
Just in a way, I just see
So those-
kind of a similarity with.
So
this
those
thing,
things, I think, fulfill some
Right,
of the things in chapter 17, but not all of them.
right.
I think some. So the United Nations isn't known for prostitution or, harlotry and all of that kind of stuff, and not known for ships and stuff coming to the United Nations, unless you start saying, well, they're not really known for that, but the countries that belong are known for that, but then you got plural, and you got to get to one, right? You got to keep with one nation, one city, and all that.
Well, just to bring something that could help describe what we're trying to describe here.
Yeah.
Something that currently.
Well, everybody wants to identify,
Not that it's them, I'm not
yeah,
saying that it's.
right, but it's like them, it's similar.
So we could understand a little easier.
Yeah, so I think it's a mega city, great commerce, and then even later on it says it has ships. So what that means, all the commerce from ships and all of those different things that are destroyed and burned and smoke comes up. So I better end from here. Then we can talk some more after class if we have to. Father, thank you for this chapter 17. Chapter 17, Lord, is so confusing until the angel reveals to John the explanation of all these strange beasts and the harlot and what they mean and what they mean to us. And help us apply it in the way that you want us to apply it, not the way we feel like it should be, but what it says in the text. And let us be loyal to what it says and what John heard and what John saw and what was explained to John. And Lord, we thank you for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.